Story 1, two things. When he called the cave rescuer a pedophile, and doubled down on it after lying about sending a rescue mini-sub. During the height of COVID, he claimed he was retrofitting his production and said he sent 1,000 ventilators to desperate US hospitals. He actually sent a few useless and cheap outsourced continuous positive airway pressure machines for sleep apnea. He never did send a single ventilator. Story 2. The first time I realized there was something wrong with him was when he accused one of the mine divers of being a pedophile because he was mad at him. It was all downhill from there. Story 3. That whole thing with the kids trapped in the cave in Thailand where Musk tried to insert himself as the hero. When the professional divers actually rescued the kids and nobody took Musk's mini-submarine idea seriously, and then he goes and calls the leader of the rescue team a pedophile, it really revealed a lot about his character to me. He's got an ego the size of the sun, the maturity of a 12-year-old, and the self-awareness of a brick. Story 4. Thai cave incident is when it started. But then it continued every time he opened his stupid mouth about things he clearly had no idea about. He is not a futurist. He is just another reactionary who wishes he could be a 19th century robber baron. Story 5. It should have been obvious after the Thai cave incident, but I didn't follow that story closely. The very first time I started to have questions was when he proposed an underground hyperloop for Route 1 in Delaware. Most people have probably forgotten that, but I'm from Delaware and have driven on Route 1 many times in my life, so it caught our attention here. Route 1 gets a lot of traffic in the summer when people are trying to get from points north to the beach resort towns, but it is otherwise a pretty empty stretch of highway connecting not much to not much. Delaware is also basically a sandbar, and you only have to dig about 2 feet to hit water. That's an exaggeration in some parts, but not by a lot. You don't even want your house to have a basement, much less a tunnel running the length of the entire state. So my first reaction was, wow, that would be awesome on July 4th weekend. Then, but why? And then, but how? And finally, wait, is there a chance this guy is actually a complete loon and nobody is caught on yet? Story 6. Quite honestly, the turning point was immediately after I started to like him. As I was starting to like him, the problem is that once you learn anything about him, you realize what a miserable sack of wasted flesh he is. Once you start looking into his social media presence, the reality becomes literally unavoidable. So I thought, hey, that Musk guy with the solar panels seems like he might be onto something. And then one Google search later, I realized I had been wrong. This was quite a while ago, so his personal opinions weren't yet plastered everywhere. Story 7. No single turning point, but several things over time. For me, the very first moment was when he kept insisting that our world is a simulation based on incredibly flimsy logic, and everybody was just like, oh yes, yes, good point, Mr. Musk. I don't have a strong opinion on the idea, but I was sort of turned off by how he had somehow risen above scrutiny at that moment. Then came the Thai cave rescue incident. I wasn't bothered by him trying to contribute resources to help, even if nobody had asked for it. But the false accusation, calling his critic a pedo guy, as I recall, and everything that followed in that story was a big issue. Then came the Cybertruck. That thing is ridiculous on a practical level in so many ways. Then came the actions he took immediately after purchasing Twitter. A lot of really bad business decisions and really poor treatment of people. Story 8. I liked him when he was focused on making green energy affordable. I remember when he came out with the Tesla solar roof, and I thought it was very cool. I still think it's a great idea. The turning point for me was when he became more political, when he started going down the anti-woke and conspiracy theorist path. I noticed that the type of people rallying around him were not the kind of people I like or even agree with. And Elon Musk kept doubling down to the point where he bought Twitter and lost all that money. It just became extremely obvious that he's very thin-skinned and the type of person that can never admit he's wrong about anything. Then, of course, he started letting his racism and anti-Semitism slip out, but I was way past my turning point by then. Story 9. I used to read about him from afar, browsing headlines and reading stories about how he's the next great inventor, that he's like a modern Nikola Tesla or something. I thought he was cool and looked forward to hearing more. As more information came out, it's clear he's just a fraud and is wealthy. Rich guy with great public relations for a few years. No one moment changed my mind about him. He just isn't what he or anyone else claimed. Just a wealthy individual investing in renewable energy because that's the future of the world. It's all done, though. He's just your usual run-of-the-mill flawed human. Not the visionary social media would have led you to believe. Story 10. The moment he started talking about Ukraine having to submit to Russia and be done with it. Then it was further amplified by him randomly shutting down Starlink to sabotage Ukrainian military operations out of pettiness. Story 11. Naming his kid that stupid name literally puts his child into a life where they either have to change their name or risk being isolated by anyone who knows their real name. Story 12. Stuff such as him saying he will donate $6 billion to fight world hunger if the charity actually laid out a comprehensive plan to make it work. They did, and then he snuck away, never to mention it again. Weird bloke. Stands for nothing other than his next 100 million. Story 13. I was a huge Elon fanboy. I would literally rage about how the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal would run baseless hit pieces on Tesla to protect their relationships with traditional auto manufacturers. I also could not wait to buy a Tesla someday. When he started going anti-woke during COVID, I went from fanboy to neutral. When he started defending Russia and saying Ukraine should surrender to preserve the global economy, I was absolutely done. Elon, just like pretty much every other insanely rich person in the United States, is purely motivated by greed and has zero morals. That's very apparent and why I now despise him. Story 14. The Thai cave and the Ukraine situation have enraged me. I can't think of anyone so high up who ruined their reputation on such foolish topics. He went out and literally sabotaged military operations. He has helped stir up anti-Ukraine rhetoric and has probably caused the deaths of many. Story 15. I was indifferent toward him. I respected him for being intelligent and thought Teslas and the work he was doing with SpaceX was cool. Once he started showing the world his personality, I realized he was just another immature rich person and con artist. Story 16. The Twitter acquisition completely blew up the notion I had of him being a great businessman. After I started seeing him in a different light, I realized that he is just a vaporware salesman. He makes bold promises that he never delivers on, and his turn towards Make America Great Again views in the last few years has really made me hold him in contempt at this point. Story 17. There was an episode of, I think, Star Trek Discovery where one character is making an inspiring speech about the history of spaceflight, and he mentions the Wright brothers, Neil Armstrong, Elon Musk, and a fictional person who invents the warp engine. Hasn't aged very well. Story 18. I liked him when he was pushing hard for electric vehicles and being a mad scientist making flamethrowers and stuff. My turning point was when he became active on Twitter, and I saw what his personality was like. Just a sad man who desperately wants people to love him and think he's funny. I prefer my evil billionaires to not care if I live or die, like Bezos or Zuckerberg. Story 19. I thought he was great. I thought he was a sensitive guy, the way he would cry in interviews and talk about how heartbroken he was that his wife left him. Even though his aspirations for space travel were lofty, I got upset with anyone telling him so. Now, what has he done? Tweeting about Jewish and black people. Fully committing to being a Republican Trump supporter. If he doesn't like someone, he calls them a pedophile. That's when I first realized he was a messed up person. When he didn't get to build that submarine to rescue those kids from that cave, a professional diver did it, which makes way more sense. And Elon gets mad he lost out on glory and tells his millions of followers that the diver is a pedophile child rapist because he visited Thailand. I hate him more than any other billionaire. He's a 50-something-year-old man with a face full of Botox, sharing edgy memes, saying things like, epic. Story 20. I was not a huge fan of his, but I had no negative feelings about him either. Then there was his weird behavior regarding that underwater cave rescue, and he began using his control over Starlink to interfere with Ukraine. I don't think he's got both oars in the water. Story 21. The cave situation was the first moment I thought he was misguided, but it wasn't until he started aligning with Donald Trump and other authoritarians that he lost my good faith. Story 22. When I discovered he was a Russian Make America Great Again traitor, he turned off Starlink while it was guiding munitions to the Russian Black Sea Fleet from Ukraine. He was watching and personally took steps to stop a Ukrainian attack on Russia, causing the bombs to fall in the water and protecting Russia. He is a full hang-em high traitor to the United States and its allies. Story 23. The diver incident where he called the man a pedophile even though he was a hero. He just got upset because he said Elon's small submarine wouldn't work. Story 24. He opened his mouth and started talking. Honestly, I did not know much about Elon Musk at all except that he was a tech startup billionaire who owned Tesla. He did a cameo in Iron Man 2 where he chats with Tony Stark. That was about the limit of my exposure to him until the incident with the Thai soccer players trapped in the cave, and he got all bent out of shape because the rescuers rejected his foolish suggestion. It was all downhill from there. Story 25. I kind of like the early idea of Elon Musk, the brilliant chief executive officer, self-made entrepreneur, futurist, founder of Tesla with an engineering background, striving to advance mankind. But the more I found out about him, it turned out that was all untrue. He's obviously smart, but he's not brilliant. He is smart enough to surround himself with brilliant people, and they do the work for him. He's not really self-made. He did make some smart investments, but he didn't start from the bottom like he would want everyone to believe. He's an heir to a millionaire emerald magnate. He had the opportunity to go to any school he wanted and start any business he wanted with no risk involved. He's not really a futurist. He's not coming up with new technologies on his own. He just latches on to other people's high-tech projects with funding. And speaking of that, he's not the founder of Tesla. The company was founded in 2003 by two engineers, Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning. Musk stepped in half a year later with funding to keep the company going and, as the chairman of the board, ordered to be added as a founder to the corporate manifest. Musk doesn't have an engineering background. He's got a Bachelor of Arts in Physics and a Bachelor of Science in Economics. I'm not one to discriminate against people based on their education, but Musk himself wants to be perceived as an inventor and engineer, but he just isn't one. He hires engineers to do the job that he then takes credit for. Finally, it should be obvious now that Musk isn't trying to advance mankind. He advertised Tesla vehicles as the solution to transport-based carbon emissions, but he's vehemently opposed to public transit and tried to stop or at least stall the construction of the California high-speed rail. Instead of using the Boring Company to burrow subway tunnels, he's making inefficient personal car tunnels. The Cybertruck is the antithesis of harmonious, sustainable living, but it was his pet project because he wants an armored vehicle to feel isolated from the public. His idea of going to Mars is rooted in his unwillingness to be told what to do. He hates that there are laws he has to obey, so he aims to make his own enclave, where what he says goes. And that was all before he turned into an alt-right extremist, bought Twitter, and started having his public meltdowns. In summary, it wasn't one particular thing but just finding out that his public persona was manufactured and didn't match what he actually did. Story 26. It wasn't just one thing, but the pile that kept growing. The incident with the cave rescuer. The going private at $420 a share statement. The headbutting a Tesla on the conveyor belt to make a point about overrated safety and increasing conveyor speed to produce more cars. The union suppression. The anti-transgender comments. The erratic tweets. Buying Twitter and the numerous questionable decisions made afterward. Eventually, it becomes more and more obvious that either he never actually had much going for him besides the hype, or he lost whatever it was that made him worthy of any acclaim. It is clear his judgment has deteriorated, and he let the praise inflate his ego to an unmanageable size. He has removed smart individuals from his circle and now only has agreeable followers. There is no other explanation for the poor decisions made with Twitter. Additional issues. The Hyperloop project, which he sold as a promise he obviously couldn't fulfill. The Tesla self-driving technology, which he exaggerated beyond its capabilities, caring more about media attention than the quality of the technology. Consistent failure to deliver on promises. Story 27. I liked him well enough when all I knew about him were the memes, like the not a flamethrower thing. I stopped liking him when I learned literally anything more about him. Story 28. I think the first thing was learning about how poorly many Tesla workers are treated and his anti-union stances. Then learning about the Emerald Mine issue, and then I think soon after he started working with the Trump administration, and then it just snowballed from there. And here we are today where he's allowing Nazi and anti-trans voices to be amplified on his platform. Story 29. Like others, the Thai cave incident was the starting point, but I overlooked that as him just being eccentric because I still felt he was doing amazing things with Tesla and SpaceX. I badly wanted a Tesla. But then he started going to the far right politically, fighting COVID-19 restrictions and debating the science of it. Then he bought Twitter and completely messed it up. He paid less attention to Tesla while Tesla was not living up to all the promises he made and still isn't. At that point, I stopped wanting a Tesla, not just because of his eccentricities, but also because I no longer believe the product is a good one, and sold all my stock, locking in some nice gains, thankfully. The only one of his companies I still admire greatly is SpaceX, but that's largely due to the fact that he put someone smart and stable in charge, Gwynne Shotwell, and appears to be staying out of the way.